Right now in the state of Washington, there's a record number of mentally ill people suffering long and unconstitutional delays in the criminal justice system.
Sir, let me explain my expectations in the courtroom.
Expectations He's fired.
Behind bars, they're waiting for court-ordered treatment, help to restore their mental health so they can understand the charges against them.
I didn't think there was a universe in which a state agency would just really renege on their obligations.
Would you say that the state is in a crisis?
A competency crisis, for sure. Adding beds, building beds, unfortunately, takes time to do.
We have been overwhelmed by this tsunami of mental illness that we have suffered. If you put somebody in jail and you don't treat the mental health problem, they just reoffend when they come out.
I think it makes us feel helpless and like we're on our own and that we're not getting the support that we need. And clearly this person is not getting the support that they've needed.
I'm Susanna Frame with the King 5 investigators. 2 years ago, we unearthed a massive problem in the state of Washington. Criminally ill defendants sitting in jail waiting for treatment for months and months at a time. It was unconstitutional, and we exposed the many ways that it was hurting not only the people in jail, but putting public safety at risk as well. Now, it's been 2 years, and since that time, we've seen a massive turnaround. The state is now getting people out of jail, not in 5 months, but 5 days. But right now, let's take you back to the beginning, when we began our series, Mentally Ill, Waiting in Jail.
Sir, let me explain my expectations in the courtroom.
Expectations He's fired.
Over the last several months,
Your Honor, the suffering here is egregious.
our cameras were rolling
I have anxiety.
as a record number of defendants deemed incompetent to stand trial filed into court.
He has now been incarcerated 4 months.
People with mental illnesses so severe they don't understand the charges against them.
It looks to me like maybe you're hearing voices today. Am I right about that? Yeah.
We are asking the court to dismiss this case.
We saw defense attorneys routinely asking judges to throw out the charges
The defense is asking the court respectfully to dismiss the charges.
because their clients are sick and languishing in jail without mental health treatment for lengths of time never seen before in the state of Washington. Alexander J. of Seattle is one of those defendants.
The amount of time that Mr. J is being required to wait is barbaric.
In April, a judge found he was incompetent to stand trial and ordered he be sent to Western State Hospital in Steilacoom to try to get stabilized. The treatment's called competency restoration. The court ruled Jay needed to be out of jail and in the hospital within 7 days. But he's been waiting behind bars for more than 7 months.
It's unbelievable. You want it to be done.
Kim Hayes is one of Jay's alleged victims. A light rail security camera captured this random attack in March as she was going to work as a trauma nurse at Harborview. Her clavicle and ribs were broken, and she thought she could have been killed.
Can you characterize or put into words what this whole experience has done to you?
It has changed my life.
Kim says the state's delays are unacceptable for everyone.
I want to move on with my life, but I would move on quicker if we, for him, that resolution of getting him into an appropriate bed, an appropriate place.
You think you could heal faster?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
In a 2015 order, federal judge Marcia Peckman ruled the state is violating the constitutional rights of some of its most vulnerable citizens, that jails are not hospitals, and the mentally ill are being warehoused while they wait for services. Peckman ordered DSHS to provide inpatient treatment within 7 days of a judge ruling the help is needed. But that hasn't happened. Despite the judge's order and millions of extra dollars spent on resources, we found the state's wait times have gotten worse, not better. State records show in 2015, the average wait time for a bed at Western was less than a month. In 2022, that wait has shot up to 4 months and longer.
Would you ever have imagined that in 2022 we'd be in this place?
Absolutely not.
ACLU's legal director, LaRon Baker, was one of the attorneys on the case that led to the 7-day timeline.
I didn't think there was a universe in which a state agency would just really renege on their obligations. It's a real human tragedy.
A year after the federal court ruling, Judge Peckman railed against the state for not doing better, writing DSHS needed to stop the procrastination and false promises. She ruled the state in contempt and leveled fines for not meeting deadlines. From 2016 to 2018, that cost DSHS $88 million. After that, a settlement agreement put the fines on hold, but they're still accumulating. Records we've compiled show if it all has to be paid, the total bill would now be more than $300 million.
I put together this database.
Doctors Brian Wablinger and Thomas Kinlan are the state's top officials overseeing Western State Hospital.
That's the total. What do you think of that?
Unbelievable.
Would you say that the state is in a crisis?
A competency crisis for sure.
This has got to be difficult.
Oh, it's crushing. It's disheartening.
The doctors say this year the state was hit with a perfect storm, including the effects of COVID. After several shutdowns at hospital admissions, a backlog of cases are now coming through. Also, staffing is at historic lows. At Western State, about a quarter of the jobs are sitting unfilled.
I'm being subjected to solitary confinement.
And more than anything, they say there's a whopping increase in need.
We knew ahead of time that services would be increasing over time. We knew that. What happened recently, we don't understand that. I don't think anyone expected that to happen.
DSHS is working to build new bed space. This project at Western State will add dozens of new spots next year. And they're building in Thurston and Clark counties, trying to decrease wait times for patients and decrease the likelihood of getting dragged back to court to pay the piled up fines.
We have to be fiscally mindful, and having to pay $300 million would be, that's the taxpayers' dollars. So of course it's concerning.
I am finding the department in contempt.
Judges are clearly fed up, saying the state's efforts aren't enough for defendants, taxpayers, and victims alike.
The delay imposed by the government is unconscionable, and it is inconsistent with the behavior of a civilized society. It is absolutely outrageous.
They've got to pay the price for not providing this, especially, human care to people who need it, this mental health care. The longer this process goes on, it does take away your belief in the system, and it affects so many people.
This is Josh Stoller, who has a form of schizophrenia in what's called the cage in the Chelan County Jail in Wenatchee. 6 years ago, he was locked up in the cage, or in here, this solitary confinement cell no bigger than a parking stall, not for days or weeks, but for a solid year, 23 hours a day.
It's hard to think about because here you are in this confined box.
Josh was in psychosis with voices shouting frightening messages.
This is the end of your life. We'll let you know when we're going to kill you. The stuff and nightmares.
That sounds like the ultimate description of human suffering.
Yeah.
In 2015, police found writings about threats to kill and a list of people in Josh's apartment. He was charged with attempted murder, charges he says he didn't understand.
Obviously, I did something wrong, or else I wouldn't be in there, but I didn't understand.
During those months in solitary confinement, Josh deteriorated. A jail counselor wrote he hears voices all day. Very mean people are telling him his parents are dead, he'll die in prison, and he's seeing spiders and cockroaches in his cell.
Did you even want to be living?
No.
I don't know how to quantify that type of horrific experience.
In court, we heard details of the suffering.
He is essentially in a cage 23 hours a day, and the impact on his mental health is not lost on this court.
Ms. Johnson desperately needs medical attention, and each day that she spends compounds that harm.
I'm being subjected to solitary confinement in this jail without treatment.
I absolutely believe you and understand that you are suffering up in solitary. I absolutely believe that.
Is jail one of the worst places for someone with a serious mental illness?
It's not just one of the worst, it is the worst place for a person to be who has a serious mental illness.
Lisa Daly is director of the Treatment Advocacy Center in Washington, D.C. Decades of research shows jail is extremely detrimental to people who are sick with mental illness. A study by the UN called it a form of torture, and the longer the wait in jail, the harder it becomes to get better.
It can really cause irreversible brain damage. Basically, the longer that a person spends in untreated psychosis, the harder it is for them to return to the same level of functioning once they're actually receiving treatment again.
So it's a lot of resources, a lot of energy invested in trying to turn this number around, and unfortunately, we've not been successful in doing that.
DSHS says the biggest challenge is the increase in need. In the last 6 years, the number of people sitting in jails like here at King County needing help at a state psychiatric hospital has nearly doubled, nearly twice as many people in the last 6 years.
He got so much worse in jail.
Jerry Clark's son Calvin of Vancouver, Washington, landed in both the King and Clark County jails while sick with bipolar disorder.
It added terror to horror.
Jerry says after a month behind bars, they didn't recognize their son.
The system had plenty of time to figure out how to help him appropriately, and instead traumatized him, and his illness got worse. No one wants to believe that somebody that you love that deeply could ever experience what we went through. It is unbelievable what happened to my son. It's unbelievable.
Before the onset of his mental illness, Calvin was a skilled surfer, scholar, and state champion debater. He got a college scholarship for debate. But Calvin never finished college. 9 months after getting out of jail at the age of 23, he died by suicide.
Do you think your son could be alive today if he wouldn't have been incarcerated while he was so mentally ill?
Yeah. I believe that because of his incarcerations, he felt like he had been pushed to the bottom of society and discarded.
Josh Stoller's come a long way since his time in jail. He's a new dad and engaged to be married. He's also advocated for change in Olympia. That's Josh standing right by the governor at a 2019 signing of a bill aimed at decreasing wait times in jail. He'd hoped conditions had changed, and they have. Timelines for getting help have gotten worse, not better.
I'm pissed. Very, very angry about that. If you let people languish in the conditions of county jails for that long, I would consider that a crime against humanity.
A bystander caught this video of 54-year-old Beatrice Shariga bashing out restaurant windows in the U District in September, one of dozens of alleged crimes in the area that have landed him in the King County Jail over the years. On several occasions, judges have found Shariga seriously mentally ill, incompetent to stand trial, and ordered he get treatment at Western State Hospital. But in 3 cases in the last 2 years, Shariga didn't get a bed at Western State. Instead, he waited behind bars for help that never came, and then was let back out on the street.
It's extremely disturbing. I think it just creates so much fear.
Maureen Ewing is executive director of the University Heights Center, a nonprofit dedicated to enriching the neighborhood. But crime sprees by Shariga have terrorized their staff and patrons.
I think it makes us feel helpless and like we're on our own, and that we're not getting the support that we need. And clearly this person is not getting the support that they've needed for a decade.
This case is one of the reasons why King County filed a motion saying at the King County Jail, they're overloaded with mentally ill inmates. King County said it should be compensated for its losses, and that the entire point of the county's motion is to get defendants out of the jail and into a hospital for the services that are needed. The county's attorney said they hoped fines would spur the state to act more quickly.
So that the county is no longer forced to care for them and house them in our jail, where, quite frankly, they do not at this point belong.
And we certainly are not just standing idly by. We're working as hard as we can to get people in and fill beds.
DSHS officials say they will oppose the county's motion, that their hands are tied. The need at Western State Hospital has increased dramatically, and like the rest of the country, they're facing a staffing crisis.
We're adding capacity as fast as we can, but adding beds, building beds, unfortunately, takes time to do.
Beatrice Shariga was set to be released back to the streets this week, most likely headed back to the U District. Instead, the King County Prosecutor's Office refiled the most recent charges against him. He's back in jail, waiting again for help from the state of Washington.
We failed him. This isn't the first time that he's been in this situation, and he is unwell and he needs medical attention, and that is the crux of the problem.
It's a grief like we haven't experienced before, and that's what I felt in the whole community. It was, no, this can't be.
The rural mountain town of New Meadows, Idaho, population 517, saw its first act of random violence anyone here can remember. A Vancouver, Washington man, John Cody Hart, allegedly shot and killed Rory and Sarah Meehan. It happened in the lobby of the historic Heartland Inn that they owned and operated.
So when I received the call Saturday, I was numb.
The town immediately gathered to mourn these pillars of the community, people they'd known for years.
They were all about people coming together for a common purpose.
Julie Good is the mayor of New Meadows.
How is it that he is free to come into our small, quiet, beautiful community and wreak havoc, not just with the family's life, but with our lives?
When the murders happened, John Cody Hart wasn't supposed to be here on the streets of rural Idaho. He was supposed to be at Western State Hospital in Pierce County, getting treatment ordered by a Washington state judge. Before Hart made it to Idaho, he was behind bars in Washington, one of about 850 defendants in the state waiting for court-ordered mental health treatment.
John Cody Hart present. If you are, state your date of birth.
September 2nd, 1994, Your Honor.
In Hart's case, he was in the Clark County Jail in Vancouver, charged with assault. Unprovoked, he allegedly attacked an acquaintance. Court records show he strangled the man and tried to rip his eyes out. Deemed incompetent to stand trial, Hart waited 4 months behind bars for a bed at Western State until a judge got fed up.
I simply can't continue to hold him on the expectation that maybe someday they'll come pick him up.
The Department of Social and Health Services, DSHS, kept putting off Hart's admission date to the hospital. Judge Robert Lewis ruled his constitutional rights were being violated and released him in July to wait for a bed at Western State in the community.
I do this with some reluctance as the charges against Mr. Hart are very serious. His motion to release is granted.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Good day.
3 months later, Rory and Sarah Meehan were dead.
It's insulting a little, the reality that this didn't have to happen. It's going to be difficult no matter what, but the way that it happened and the reason that it happened, it just adds a little bit more of a punch to the pain that we're already feeling.
I mean, that's horrible to hear. That's the first I'm hearing about that.
Is that something that weighs heavily on you? Basically, I'm talking about public safety.
Of course. I mean, myself, the entire department, that is a huge concern as well. Again, want to try to get to these orders as quickly as possible.
Judges are ordering a record number of defendants get help at Western State Hospital.
So we're working as hard as we can. If we can't create extra beds or we can't create staff out of thin air, what can we do to make things work better?
This is a public safety crisis.
Rebecca Vasquez focuses on these cases for the King County Prosecutor's Office. She says the state's problem is this: poor planning and chronic underfunding, creating the worst chaos she's seen.
Our whole community is impacted by not taking care of people with serious behavioral health needs.
Records obtained by King 5 show that in King County, because of the long wait times, judges have dismissed charges including burglary, felony harassment, indecent exposure, hate crimes, and assault with a deadly weapon.
How would you characterize what you're seeing now?
Immense crisis. And the system is years past its breaking point.
DSHS officials say the ultimate goal is to prevent people with mental illness from ever entering the criminal justice system in the first place, and they're working hard to figure that out.
Do you feel like there's hope to turn this around?
I would not be doing this job if I didn't think there was hope. We are thinking innovatively. You know, what can we do differently?
Rory and Sarah were my friends.
Back in rural Idaho, a grief-stricken community has a message for leadership in the state of Washington.
Whatever they can do to make it so this doesn't happen again to another small community, whatever needs to happen, they need to find a way.
1, 2, 3, there we go. Okay.
Governor Jay Inslee, along with the head of DSHS, led a ribbon-cutting ceremony for what's called the Civil Center for Behavioral Health at Maple Lane. It's a $20 million state-of-the-art building that will treat 16 people at a time, people who've been found incompetent to stand trial, but ordered by a judge to stay in state care until they can be safely released. A top goal is getting people out of Western State Hospital and into beds here, making room for mentally ill inmates sitting in jails in record numbers. The opening of this 24/7 facility comes at a time that the state admits it's in a crisis. Not enough beds for mentally ill inmates who are stuck in jails across the state.
So I could not be more excited about what this represents, which is one of our first steps in the transformation of how we provide mental health to our families and the communities.
This is an emergency. This is an extreme emergency.
Kim Mozoff is the lead attorney for Disability Rights Washington, DRW, which took DSHS to federal court over the issue of leaving people with serious mental illness in jail. It's called the True Blood class action case. But since that time, wait times have gotten worse for the class members. In the last year, some are waiting 8, 9, and 10 months for a hospital bed.
When I visit class members in jails around the state, they are living in conditions that I think, frankly, would shock most people. We are keeping people in conditions that are essentially torture. And right now, the state's keeping them in those conditions for months with no end in sight.
That prompted DRW to file this motion asking a federal judge to impose heavier fines against DSHS for missing deadlines. DSHS has already paid $98 million in sanctions connected to the case. If the judge rules in favor of DRW, another $250 million could be due, bringing the total to nearly $350 million. DSHS says they're building new beds as fast as they can, and they have plans to move some patients out of Western State Hospital and into the community, making more room for those in jail. But in DRW's legal filing, they say the state should have seen this critical moment coming.
I think the state's poor planning and poor management of this patient population got us here. The crisis was foreseeable and it was preventable, so I think they need to follow through on that plan as quickly as they can.
We'll leave it at the $500 per day at this time.
$28,500, $75,500.
And sanctions will continue until date of admission.
In Grace Harbor County, the courts are heaping sanctions against DSHS for leaving mentally ill inmates in their jail for months on end, which is against the law.
The problem started to get worse and worse, and so that's when we sort of decided to take action. Western State, DSHS, is supposed to be paying the bill, but instead, by them violating the statute, we're paying the bill.
And that's rough on local jails. At the Grace Harbor Jail in Montesano, about 20% of the population is now made up of people who are supposed to be in state care, extremely mentally ill defendants.
I've been doing this for over 45 years, and I've never seen anything like this.
Space is tight here. The medical ward is the size of a closet. They have no mental health professionals on staff, or enough staff to safely deal with a crisis. The mentally ill offenders behind these doors are routinely violent. It's hard to make out behind the damaged window, but you can see piles of food containers and garbage on the floor. It's tough to clean out the cell because it takes 4 people to handle the inmates safely. But typically, there's only 4 people on staff for the entire facility.
It's a huge labor-intensive drain on all the resources within our organization.
Fines are piling up across the state. Records show courts have issued sanctions to DSHS in counties including Cowlitz, Pacific, Wahkiakum, Pierce, Whatcom, King, and Grace Harbor, where the tally alone is up to nearly $1 million, about half to help the jail run and the rest to the defendants themselves for the violation of their civil rights.
And for the defendants, that's serious. I mean, they're being held without a trial. The criminal proceedings are stayed. They're not going anywhere. They're just kind of sitting stuck. How do you put a price on that? You know, if you're being detained for months against your due process rights, what should the compensation be?
I'm going to sanction the department $250 per day.
In King County, judges have issued sanctions of $250 per day for dozens of defendants. A judge ordered Alexander J. to receive treatment within 7 days of the order. Months later, He's still waiting inside the King County Jail, and the state fines he'll receive are growing, currently at $75,000 for unconstitutionally sitting behind bars.
We have been overwhelmed by this tsunami of mental illness that we have suffered, but I think we are moving as fast as humanly possible.
But the governor and DSHS officials say it's not just the state's fault, but the counties share the blame for the crisis in our jails. That law enforcement, courts, and prosecutors are too focused on shoving people through the criminal justice system and allowing them to suffer in jail instead of getting people the help they need. DSHS filed a legal document saying counties are ignoring their own role in creating the demand by sending an incessant stream of people to Western State to get them mentally stable for trial.
We need counties to be more interested in solving the problem, which is mental health, rather than to be focused just on putting people in jail. If you put somebody in jail and you don't treat the mental health problem, they just reoffend when they come out.
Prosecutors tell us they're trying to keep communities safe and that shifting blame isn't the answer, especially as jails across the state are at the tipping point.
Now, every jail in the state of Washington has become an ad hoc psychiatric facility. We've literally hit the bottom.
What do you think?
Amazing. Amazing.
Kim Hayes of Seattle is an assault survivor who became an unlikely advocate for offenders like these. Seriously mentally ill people who didn't need a jail cell, but a hospital bed. And after several difficult years, the state of Washington made it happen.
Absolutely fantastic.
This is security video of Kim getting brutally assaulted 2 years ago at a Seattle light rail station. It made national headlines. The state deemed her alleged attacker, Alexander J., so mentally ill he should be transported from jail to a state hospital by law within 7 days. Instead, Jay got stuck at the King County Jail for nearly a year. Beds at facilities like Western State Hospital in Lakewood were full. In 2022, he was one of about 500 mentally ill inmates in Washington holed up in local jails. Today, that number's down to 15 people, and wait times for a bed have gone from 4 to even 9 months to just 5 days.
I think it's fabulous. I think that is one of the best outcomes, the best outcome that can happen for everyone.
These are the shortest wait times I've ever seen in 9 years in this position, probably even longer than that. And the other positive is we're showing that we're able to maintain this.
So you're saying it's not a fluke?
It's not a one-off, correct.
How did they do it? How did DSHS move hundreds of mentally ill inmates out of jails like King County's here in Seattle? Last year, they made a bold and sudden move. They asked the legislature for $90 million to buy an old hospital, renovate it, and staff it. And it worked. Governor Jay Inslee cut the ribbon last year on the new facility in Tukwila, Olympic Heritage Hospital.
Oh boy.
In October, the state moved 70 patients from facilities like Western State into Olympic Heritage, freeing up those beds for people waiting in jails. And they did it
currently under construction
from purchase to move-in less than 2 months.
I can't think in almost 30 years of state government of a project like Olympic Heritage that has been as aggressive and as speedy.
More projects got put on the fast track. In the last few months, DSHS moved 60 less acute patients into newly renovated treatment units at what's called Maple Lane near Centralia.
Well, this is my room. It's pretty cool.
Residents told us the new setting is helping them with a more inclusive, less sterile place to live and get better.
It's really friendly and inviting, especially with the open windows and stuff, like big windows, and you don't see that in other facilities. Other facilities are more like jail. Yeah, it's cool.
Administrators who have taken their lumps the last few years say it's a welcome day to be showing results.
Thank you so much. There has been just like, okay, what did we do now? But to have you standing here today to just see and hearing about some of the great work that we're doing, it is a positive thing that we're doing for DSHS.
You're coming to or from work?
I was coming to work.
Last week we went with Kim as she went back to the light rail station for the first time since her attack. So what is that like for you to be here?
It's okay.
The assault was 2 years ago.
It did take you a while to ride light rail, didn't it?
Oh, God, I didn't. A year and a half.
During that time, she used her voice for change.
It does take away your belief in the system.
She never stopped speaking out or attending court hearings about the case.
But I did not want to hide in the shadows. Oh, I've got to make something out of this. It was a bad situation. I mean, that's why I called you. I was like, can you help me with this? And let's figure out something that gets this out to people.
The state isn't done. Right now, they're building more units that will open up soon in Vancouver and Clark County. And many more beds are going to be coming online in a couple of years in the Centralia area back at Maple Lane. Here's the question. Can the state keep it up? Can they stay on pace? They say they can. They say they can continue to get mentally ill patients out of jail and into treatment quickly. Thank you for watching our series, Mentally Ill Waiting in Jail. In the newsroom, I'm Susanna Frame.